Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Horror. Here on this channel, I share real life encounters shared by real people to help you unwind and relax. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My name's Derek Lawson. I grew up in a small town in southern Louisiana, right on the edge of a big stretch of marshland. Hunting and fishing were just part of growing up there. My uncle got me into duck hunting when I was a teenager, and it stuck. Even now, I still go out with him a few times every season when we can line up our schedules. I work a regular job during the week doing HVAC installs, so those early mornings in the marsh are something I always look forward to. This happened a couple seasons ago, late December. It was cold for down there, not freezing, but enough that you could see your breath early in the morning. My uncle and I had gone out before sunrise to a spot we'd used before. It wasn't private land, but it was far enough out that you didn't usually run into many people. We got set up in a small blind near the edge of the water, surrounded by reeds and low brush. It was still dark when we finished, then just that faint gray light starting to come up. Everything felt normal at first. We talked quietly, set our decoys, got everything ready, got everything up. As the sun came up, you could start to see more detail across the water and into the tree line on the far side. That's when my uncle nudged me. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed. I followed his finger toward the trees. There was someone standing there, at the edge of the tree line, maybe 100 yards out. At first, I thought it was another hunter, but something about it didn't look right. They weren't wearing any orange, no visible gear, no gun, just standing there, facing us. I squinted a little, trying to make it out better. That's when I saw the binoculars. They were holding them up, looking straight at us, not scanning the area, not looking around, just focused directly on where we were. I remember feeling that slight shift in my chest, not panic, just awareness. I leaned closer to my uncle and asked if he saw it. He said, yeah. We both just watched for a second. The person didn't move, just stood there, binoculars up. After a few seconds, I raised my hand slightly, kind of a half wave. No react, nothing. Then, slowly, they lowered the binoculars. Not quick, not startled, just a slow, steady movement. They kept facing us, didn't turn away, didn't step back, just stood there. Then, after a few seconds, they lifted the binoculars again, back up, looking right at us. That's when it started to feel off. Most hunters, if they spot someone else, they acknowledge it. A wave, a nod, something. This person didn't. They just kept watching. We went quiet for a bit after that, just sitting there, listening. Every now and then, we'd glance back toward the tree line. Each time, same thing. They'd have the binoculars up, watching. If we looked directly at them, they'd lower them slowly. Not hiding, not trying to disappear, just lowering them enough that we knew they'd been looking. Then, after a moment, they'd raise them again. It felt deliberate, like they didn't care if we knew. After maybe 15 minutes of this, I started noticing something else. They hadn't moved from that spot. Not even a step. Just standing there, same position. No shifting, no adjusting. That's when it started feeling more uncomfortable. I whispered to my uncle, asked if he thought we should move. He didn't answer right away. He just kept watching. Then he said, let's give it a minute. So we stayed, tried to focus on hunting, but it was hard. Every few minutes I'd glance over, same thing, binoculars up, watching, lowering them slowly. When we looked back, the longer it went on, the more it felt wrong. It wasn't just curiosity, it felt like we were being studied. After maybe 30 minutes total, my uncle spoke up again, said quietly, that guy's not hunting. I agreed. There was no gear, no movement, no reason to be standing there like that for that long. We decided to pack up, not in a rush, just calmly, but neither of us wanted to stay there anymore. As we started gathering our stuff, I glanced over again. The person was still there, still watching. Binoculars up, no change. We stood up fully, making more noise now as we packed. They lowered the binoculars again, slowly, but this time they didn't raise them back up right away. They just stood there, watching us directly. That's when it felt different, more direct, more focused. We didn't waste time after that. We packed everything up and started heading back toward the path we came in on. As we moved, I kept looking back. The person stayed in the same spot, didn't follow, didn't call out, just stood there, watching. We didn't stop until we got back to the truck. Neither of us said much on the way. Once we were in the truck, I asked my uncle if he knew who that could have been. He just shook his head, said he'd never seen anyone act like that out there. Maybe it was just someone with no sense of boundaries. Maybe they were just curious, but the way they stood there, the way they kept raising and lowering the binoculars, and how they didn't move for that long. It didn't feel like normal behavior, and I haven't gone back to that spot since. My name's Cole Davidson. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where hunting season is basically a holiday. Everyone I knew either hunted or had someone in their family who did. I've been going out since I was a kid, mostly with my dad at first, then later with friends. These days, it's just something I do every year without thinking much about it. It's normal. Quiet mornings, cold air, sitting still for hours. This happened a couple seasons ago, early November. I went out with my friend Matt. We'd both hunted that same public land before, nothing new. It's a pretty big area, a mix of woods and brush, with a few old trails cutting through it. Not remote exactly, but you can go a long time without seeing anyone if you get far enough in. We got there early, well before sunrise, still completely dark when we parked. It was cold, that kind of damp cold where your breath hangs in front of you. No wind, just still. We walked in together for about 15 minutes before splitting up a bit, maybe 50 yards apart. Close enough to hear each other if we talked, but far enough to cover more ground. At first, everything was normal. You get used to the sounds, leaves crunching under your boots, the occasional branch snapping, distant animals moving. Once we got settled, we mostly stayed quiet, just whispering now and then. Maybe 20 minutes after we stopped, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from off to my right, somewhere deeper in the brush. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It's hunting season. Other people are out there. I figured it was another hunter moving through. The steps weren't rushed, just steady, like someone walking carefully. I turned slightly, trying to see through the trees, but it was still pretty dark. You could make out shapes, not details. I whispered over to Matt, asked if he heard it. He said, yeah. We both just kind of listened. The footsteps kept going for a few seconds, then stopped. That wasn't weird on its own. People stop, adjust, check things, but then we started talking again, just quietly, and the footsteps started up again. Same slow pace, same direction, and we stopped talking. The footsteps stopped too. That's when I noticed it. I stayed still, not saying anything. A few seconds passed, nothing. Then I shifted slightly, just enough to make a little noise. Almost right after, the footsteps started again, then stopped. It felt reactive, like whoever it was moving when we made noise and stopping when we didn't. I remember thinking maybe they just didn't want to be seen. Maybe they were trying to avoid crossing paths, but something about the timing didn't feel natural. It wasn't random. It was too exact. Matt whispered over again, asked if I could see anything. I said no. We both went quiet. The woods were still for a bit. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Still off to the right, but definitely closer than before. Same pace, step, pause, step, pause. Not crashing through the brush like an animal would. Careful, measured. I turned more, trying to get a better angle, but I still couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. We stayed quiet for a while after that. The footsteps didn't continue steadily. They came in short bursts. A few steps, stop. A few more. Stop. Each time, it felt like they were adjusting position, not walking through, staying in the area. After maybe 15 minutes of this, I started feeling that tension build. It wasn't just another hunter passing through. If it was, they would have moved on by now. This person wasn't moving away, they were staying nearby. Matt whispered again, louder this time, asking, "Hey, you good over there?" He wasn't yelling, just enough to carry. The footsteps stopped immediately. No response. No voice. Nothing. We waited. Still nothing. I remember thinking, if it's another hunter, they'd usually say something, even just a quick "yeah" or "I'm over here." But there was nothing. We went quiet again. A minute passed. Then I heard it again. Closer. Definitely closer. At that point, I could feel my chest tightening a bit. I wasn't panicking, but I was definitely on edge. I shifted my position slightly, turning more toward the sound. Still couldn't see anyone, but I knew they were there, close enough that I should have seen something. Another set of steps. Then silence. It felt like they were circling. not in a wide loop, but adjusting around us, staying just out of view. Matt whispered again, this time more directly. Hey, you hunting this area? No answer, just silence. Then, after a few seconds, a couple more steps. That's when it stopped feeling normal. We both knew it. He whispered over, asking if I wanted to move. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to listen, trying to figure out where exactly the person was. But it was hard. The sound would come from one direction, then stop, then a few minutes later come from slightly somewhere else, always close, always just out of sight. This went on for a while, longer than it should have, maybe 40 minutes total. We barely talked during that time. Every time we did, the footsteps reacted. Every time we went quiet, everything stopped. It felt like whoever it was tracking us. Not passing through, not avoiding us, staying with us. Eventually, Matt said it again, more firmly this time. We should go. I agreed. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both felt it. This wasn't right. We packed up slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. As soon as we started walking back toward the trail, I heard it again. Footsteps, moving too. Not behind us directly, off to the side, keeping pace. That's what got me the most. Whoever it was didn't rush, didn't try to catch up, just stayed parallel. Same distance, same slow pace. We didn't run, but we didn't stop either. We just kept walking. After a few minutes, the sounds faded. Or maybe we just got far enough that we couldn't hear them anymore. Either way, it stopped. We got back to the truck without seeing anyone. No other cars nearby, no sign anyone else had been there. We didn't talk much on the drive back, just kind of sat with it. Maybe it was another hunter messing around. Maybe someone who didn't want to be seen. But the way they stayed with us, the way they matched our movements, and the fact they never said a word, that's the part that still bothers me. Because it didn't feel like someone just out there hunting. It felt like someone watching and choosing not to be seen. My name's Brandon Keeler. I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, surrounded by woods and lakes. Hunting season was always a big deal where I'm from, and I've been going out since I was a kid with my dad. These days, I usually go alone. It's something I've always liked. Quiet, just being out there with nothing else going on. I work a pretty normal job during the week doing maintenance for a school district, so getting out into the woods on weekends is kind of my reset. This happened last November during deer season. I went out early one morning to a piece of public land I'd hunted a few times before. It's a big stretch of mixed forest with some trails, but mostly just open woods. Not completely remote, but quiet enough that you don't usually run into many people if you go deep enough. It was cold that morning, not snowing, but there was a light layer of frost on the ground and patches of older snow still tucked into the shaded areas. The kind of conditions where you can see tracks clearly if you're paying attention. I parked off a dirt access road just after sunrise and started walking in. I followed a narrow trail for a bit before cutting off into the woods where I'd had luck before. At first, everything was normal. Just the usual sounds, wind in the trees, the crunch of leaves under my boots. I wasn't seeing much, but that's not unusual early on. After about an hour, I stopped near a clearing and noticed my tracks behind me. You get used to seeing them in those conditions, especially when there's frost or light snow. That's when I noticed another set. Boot prints, crossing over mine. I remember stopping for a second, looking at them. At first, I didn't think much of it. Public land, other hunters around, it happens. I figured someone had come through earlier and just happened to cross the same path. The prints looked fresh, though. Clear edges, not filled in or softened at all. But, again, I told myself it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything. I kept moving. I walked another few hundred yards, cutting slightly uphill toward a thicker patch of trees. When I stopped again, I looked back out of habit, and there they were again. Another set of boot prints, crossing over mine. This time I paid more attention. The angle was different than before. Not following the same direction I'd come from, just crossing over like someone had walked across my path. I stood there for a minute, thinking, maybe there were multiple hunters moving around the area. That wasn't unusual either, but something about it felt off. The tracks looked just as fresh as mine. I knelt down and looked closer. The impressions were sharp, no signs they'd been there for long. I told myself I was overthinking it. I kept moving. For the next 20 minutes or so, I tried not to focus on it. I walked deeper into the woods, moving slower now, scanning for deer. But every time I stopped, I checked behind me. And every time, after a short stretch, I saw them again. Boot prints, crossing mine, not following behind me in a straight line, not walking alongside, just appearing across my path. Each time in a slightly different spot, each time looking fresh. That's when it really started to bother me. I stopped longer the next time and tried to think it through. If someone had been ahead of me, their tracks should have been under mine, not on top. If they were crossing randomly, I should have seen them at some point. Heard something. Branches breaking, leaves moving, anything. But I hadn't. It had been quiet, too quiet. I started paying more attention to the woods around me, listening, looking. Nothing stood out. No movement, no sound beyond the usual. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I decided to change direction more sharply, just to see what would happen. Instead of following the same general path, I cut hard to the left, heading toward a denser area where the ground was softer and the snow patches were thicker. I walked for a while, making sure I was leaving clear tracks. Then I stopped, turned around, and looked. At first, nothing, just my tracks stretching back. I felt a small bit of relief. Then I stepped back a few feet, adjusting my position, and noticed something I hadn't seen at first. There they were, again, crossing over mine, in a spot I was sure had been clear a minute before. That's when my stomach dropped. Because this time, I knew. I knew those tracks hadn't been there when I first looked. They were new. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at them, trying to make sense of it. The woods were still quiet, no sound, no movement. But the tracks were there, fresh, and they hadn't been there seconds before. That's when I started to feel it. Real tension. Not panic, but that heavy awareness that something wasn't right. I didn't want to turn my back on the direction I'd come from. But I also didn't want to stay where I was. So I started moving again, slower this time, more cautious. Every few steps I'd glance back. At one point I stopped suddenly and turned around quickly. Nothing. Just trees. Silence. I listened hard. Nothing. But when I looked down at the ground again, a few yards behind me, I saw another set of those prints, crossing over mine. That's when it stopped being something I could explain away. Whoever it was, they were close. Close enough to be stepping into my path after I moved through. Close enough that I wasn't hearing them. And that's what got to me. The silence. I decided I was done. I wasn't going any deeper. I turned and started heading back toward the direction I'd come from, moving faster now. Not running, but not taking my time either. Every so often I'd check the ground behind me, and I'd see them. Those same prints, crossing over mine, still fresh, still appearing where they hadn't been moments before. I never saw the person, not once. No movement, no sound, just those tracks. After what felt like way longer than it probably was, I reached the trail again. From there, I made it back to my truck without stopping. I didn't look back much once I got closer to the road. Didn't want to. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute before starting the engine. Nothing followed me out. No one came out of the woods. Everything looked normal again. But I haven't gone back to that area since, and I don't hunt alone out there anymore, because I still can't explain how those tracks kept appearing or how someone could be that close without making a single sound. My name's Ryan Fletcher. I grew up in a small town in northern Ohio, mostly farmland with patches of woods scattered around. Hunting was just something everyone did growing up, especially in the fall. I've kept at it over the years, mostly bow hunting when I get the chance. I work during the week doing electrical work, so getting out in the evenings or on weekends is usually how I unwind. This happened last season, mid-November. I'd been hunting a small section of private land that a friend of mine lets me use. It's not huge, but it's quiet, and there's a good mix of trees and open patches where deer pass through. I'd set up a tree stand about a week earlier in a spot I liked. It overlooked a narrow path that cut through the woods, kind of like a natural funnel. I'd seen movement there before, so it felt like a solid place to sit. That evening, I got there a little before sunset. It was already getting dim, that time of day where everything starts to lose detail and the woods feel quieter than usual. I climbed up, got settled, and just waited. For the first hour or so, nothing unusual happened, just the normal stuff. Wind moving lightly through the branches, the occasional rustle of leaves, distant sounds you can't quite place. As it got darker, the woods went still. That kind of stillness where you start to notice your own breathing more than anything else. I was focused on the trail below me, scanning back and forth when I heard something. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming from behind me at first, somewhere off to the side. I didn't move right away, just listened. It sounded like someone walking through the leaves, not an animal. Too steady, too deliberate. My first thought was another hunter. It happens sometimes, even on private land. Maybe someone wandered in without realizing it. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to get a better angle without making noise. The footsteps kept coming, slow. Crunch, pause, crunch. They moved closer. Then I saw them, a figure moving through the trees below. No flashlight, no visible gear, just a person walking slowly, head slightly down. It was too dark to make out details clearly, but I could see enough to know they were moving toward my stand. That's when it started to feel off. Most hunters use some kind of light once it gets that dark, even just to navigate. This person wasn't. They were moving like they knew exactly where they were going. I stayed still, not wanting to draw attention. The person kept walking, right toward the base of my tree. Then they stopped, directly underneath me. I froze. Didn't move, didn't make a sound. I could hear them breathing, clear enough that it cut through everything else. Slow, heavy, like they weren't trying to hide it, just standing there, right below me. For a few seconds, I told myself maybe they were just resting. Maybe they didn't even know I was up there. But the way they stopped, right at the base of the tree, it didn't feel random. I kept my eyes fixed downward, trying to see more. But it was too dark to make out their face. Just a shape, standing still, breathing. Time felt longer than it probably was. Maybe a minute, maybe less. But it felt like a long time. I thought about saying something, letting them know I was there. But something stopped me. The way they hadn't said anything, hadn't looked around, just stood there. It didn't feel like someone who was lost or unaware. It felt like they knew. Like they were listening. At one point, I shifted slightly in my seat, just enough that the stand creaked a little. A small noise, but enough. The person's breathing changed slightly. Not louder, just different. Like they noticed, but they didn't look up, didn't say anything, just stayed there. Another few seconds passed, then slowly they turned. Not quickly, not startled, just a slow pivot, and started walking away. Same pace as before. Crunch, pause, crunch. Moving back into the trees, no flashlight, no words, no acknowledgement, just gone. I sat there, still frozen, listening to the footsteps fade. They didn't speed up, didn't break into a run, just kept that same steady pace until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't move for a long time after that. I just sat there listening, trying to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to believe it was just another hunter who didn't realize I was there, but that didn't line up. No light, no gear, no voice. And stopping exactly under my stand, I stayed up there until it got completely dark. Then I climbed down carefully, trying not to make noise. The whole time, I felt like I needed to look over my shoulder, like someone could still be out there, watching. I made it back to my truck without seeing anyone else. No other vehicles nearby, no sign anyone had been there. I didn't go back to that spot after that. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just someone passing through, but I can't shake how they stood there, right under me, not saying a word, just breathing, like they were waiting for something. My name's Tyler Jensen. I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota, surrounded by woods and lakes. Hunting's just something you grow up doing there. My dad taught me when I was a kid, and I've stuck with it ever since. These days, I mostly go out alone when I can. It's quiet, and I like having the space to think. I work a pretty normal job doing equipment repair, so getting out into the woods is kind of my break from everything else. This happened last fall, mid-October. I went out to a piece of public land I'd used a few times before. It's pretty remote, not a lot of easy access points, so you don't usually run into many people if you go in early enough. I got there just before sunrise. It was cold, little fog hanging low in the trees, and everything had that damp, quiet feel. I parked at a small dirt pull-off at the end of a narrow access road. There was no one else there, no other vehicles, no fresh tracks, nothing. I made a note of it, like I always do. Then I grabbed my gear and started walking in. The hike to my spot was about a mile, maybe a little more. A mix of trail and cutting through the woods. I moved slow once I got closer, settled in, and spent a few hours out there. Nothing unusual happened while I was hunting. Just the normal quiet, a few distant sounds, nothing that stood out. Around midday, I decided to head back. I hadn't seen anything, and I figured I'd call it early. The walkout started normal. Same path, same pace. About 10 minutes in, I heard something behind me, a branch snapping. Not loud, but clear. I stopped immediately, turned around, nothing. Just trees and brush. I stood there for a minute, listening. No movement. I told myself it was probably an animal. Squirrels, deer, something small moving through. That's normal out there. So I kept walking. A couple minutes later, I heard it again. Another snap. Closer this time. I stopped again, turned around. Same thing. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just quiet. That's when I started paying more attention. I didn't panic, but I was definitely more aware. I started walking again, a little slower now, listening harder. Every step I took, I tried to be aware of what was around me. A few minutes passed, then I heard it again, a branch snapping. This time it felt like it came from directly behind me. Not far. Close enough that it didn't feel like it was just something passing through. I turned around quicker this time. Still nothing. No movement, no sound after that. That's when it started to feel off. Because if something was moving through the woods, you usually hear more than one sound. A series of steps, leaves shifting, something. This was just single snaps. Then silence. I kept walking. Now I was checking behind me more often. Every few steps I'd glance back. Nothing. But every few minutes I'd hear it again. Snap, pause, silence. It didn't feel random. It felt spaced out, like something was moving, but only when I wasn't looking. That thought stuck with me more than I liked. I told myself it didn't make sense. Animals don't move like that. And if it was a person, I should have seen something by now, but I hadn't. After maybe 20 minutes of this, I started feeling that tightness in my chest. Not panic, just awareness. I didn't like that I couldn't explain it. I decided to test it. I stopped walking and stood still for longer than I had before. Didn't move, didn't make noise, just listened. Nothing happened. No snap, no movement, just quiet. I stayed like that for maybe a full minute, then I took a few steps forward, and almost right after, I heard it again. Snap. Behind me. That's when it really clicked. It was happening when I moved, not when I was still. I didn't like that at all. I started walking again a little faster now. Still not running, but definitely not taking my time. Every few minutes, the same thing. A branch snapping somewhere behind me, always after I moved, always stopping when I turned around. At one point I turned quickly, trying to catch something off guard. Nothing. Just trees. The woods looked completely normal. That made it worse, because it felt like something was there, close, but just out of sight. I kept going, trying to stay calm, telling myself it had to be something simple. But it didn't feel simple. It felt deliberate. After what felt longer than it probably was, I started getting closer to the trailhead. I could see a bit more light through the trees. That helped a little, but I still heard it once more. One last snap, closer than before. I didn't turn around that time. I just kept walking, straight to my truck. When I finally stepped out of the woods and into the clearing where I'd parked, I felt a bit of relief. But then I noticed something. There were tire tracks in the dirt. Fresh. They hadn't been there that morning, I knew that. The ground had been smooth, just my own tracks from pulling in. Now there were clear tire marks leading in and out, like someone had come and gone while I was out there. I looked around, no vehicles, no people. Just those tracks. That's when everything connected. The empty lot that morning. The fresh tracks now, and the sounds following me through the woods. I got in my truck quickly and locked the doors. Sat there for a minute just looking around. Nothing moved. Everything looked normal again. I left right after that. I haven't gone back to that spot since. Maybe someone else had shown up and left. Maybe I just didn't see them. And maybe those sounds were just an animal. But the timing, the way it followed me, and how it stopped every time I looked back, it didn't feel like something random. It felt like something that knew exactly where I was. My name's Caleb Turner. I grew up in a small town in southern Missouri, the kind of place where woods and fields just blend into each other and you get used to being outside a lot. Hunting was always part of that. My dad did it, my friends did it, so I just grew up with it. These days, I don't go as often as I used to, but when I do, it's usually with my buddy Ryan. We've been going out together since high school. This happened a couple seasons ago, late October. It wasn't freezing yet, just cool enough that you needed a jacket in the morning. The woods were thick where we were going. Lots of brush, low trees, not much open ground. It's public land, but most people stick closer to the easier trails. We liked going deeper and where it felt quieter. We got there early, just before sunrise. It was still dim, that gray light where everything looks the same for a while. We walked in together, talking quietly, then split off just a little, maybe 30 or 40 yards apart. Close enough to hear each other, far enough to cover more ground. For the first hour, nothing really happened, just normal stuff. Birds, wind, leaves under our boots when we shifted. Then I heard it. A whistle. Faint. Somewhere off in the distance. At first, I didn't think much of it. Could have been anything. People whistle sometimes out in the woods, or it could have been some kind of bird. It didn't sound like one I recognized, but I'm not exactly an expert on that. I stayed still, listening. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Same pitch, same length. Not loud, but clear enough. I turned my head slightly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was off to the right, deeper into the woods. I whispered over to Ryan, asked if he heard that. He said yeah. We both went quiet for a minute, listening. Nothing, just normal sounds again. I shrugged it off at first, but then, maybe a minute later, I shifted a little, making a bit of noise. Right after that, I heard the whistle again. Same tone, same length. That's when I started paying more attention. I stayed still for a bit, not saying anything, no whistle. Then I said something quietly to Ryan again. Almost immediately after I finished, the whistle came back. Same exact sound. That's when I felt that first bit of unease. It didn't feel random anymore. I asked Ryan if he noticed the timing. He said yeah, well, just kind of. We tested it. He said something out loud, just a normal sentence. A couple seconds after, the whistle came again. Same tone, same distance, or at least it sounded like it. We both went quiet again. Nothing. No whistle. At that point, it stopped feeling like a bird. It felt like someone responding, but not with words. Just that same whistle. We stayed there for a few more minutes trying to figure it out. Every time one of us spoke, even just a whisper, after a second or two, that whistle would come back. If we stayed quiet, it stopped. It wasn't immediate every time, but it was consistent enough that we noticed. I remember looking over in Ryan's direction, even though I couldn't really see him clearly through the trees. We both kind of knew something wasn't right. He asked if I wanted to move. I said yeah. So we started walking slowly, heading in the general direction of the trail we came in on. We didn't rush, just moved steady. At first, it was quiet again, no whistle. Then after maybe 30 seconds, Ryan said something, just a short sentence. And right after that, there it was again. Same whistle, same tone. Now it sounded a little closer. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. We both stopped, listened, nothing. Just silence again. We started walking again. This time, we didn't talk, we just moved. About a minute later, I heard the whistle again, even though neither of us had said anything. That's when my chest tightened a bit, because now it wasn't just reacting to us, it was staying with us. Following, maybe. We kept moving, not running, but definitely more focused now. Every sound around us felt sharper, leaves crunching under our boots, branches brushing against our jackets, and every so often that whistle. Same tone, same length, sometimes right after we made noise, sometimes just on its own, always from somewhere off to the side. Never directly behind us. Never in front, just parallel, like whoever it was staying just out of sight. At one point, Ryan stopped suddenly and turned toward the sound. I did the same. We both just stood there scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement, no shape, no person. Just trees and brush. It didn't make sense. If someone was that close, we should have seen something. He called out louder this time. Hey, you out here? The woods went quiet, no whistle. No response. Nothing. We waited. Still nothing. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, the whistle came again. Same tone. From a slightly different direction. That's when it really hit me. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to communicate. They weren't answering. They were just doing that. We didn't say anything else after that. We just kept moving. Faster now. Still not running, but not taking our time either. The whistle kept coming. Not constantly, but often enough that it stayed in the back of my mind, every few minutes. Sometimes closer, sometimes sounding like it had shifted position, always just out of sight. It followed us almost the whole way back. The closer we got to the trail, the less frequent it got. Or maybe we just stopped noticing it as much because we were focused on getting out. Eventually, we reached the trail, then the truck. We didn't hear it again once we were near the road. We got in, sat there for a minute, just kind of processing it. Neither of us really had a good explanation. Maybe it was another hunter, maybe someone messing around. But the way it matched us, the way it responded to us talking, and how we never saw anyone. That's what stuck. It didn't feel like someone just passing through. It felt like someone staying with us and choosing not to be seen. My name's Travis Monroe. I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, surrounded by woods and farmland. Hunting was just something you did there. My dad took me out when I was young, and I kept it up into adulthood. These days, I usually go alone when I can. It's quiet, and it's one of the few things that clears my head after a long week. I work in a warehouse during the day, so getting out into the woods feels like a reset. This happened last season, mid-November. I'd gone out to a piece of public land I'd hunted a few times before. It's a decent-sized area, not huge, but big enough that you can get away from other people if you walk in far enough. I got there just before sunrise. It was cold, that kind of damp cold where everything feels still. There was a light layer of leaves on the ground, and the air had that quiet, early morning feel to it. I walked in about a mile, maybe a little more, and found a spot near a cluster of trees overlooking a small dip in the terrain. I'd seen deer pass through there before. I set up, got comfortable, and settled in. For the first hour or so, everything was normal, just the usual sounds, wind moving through the branches, a few distant birds, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I heard the first shot. It was loud, way louder than I expected. Close. Not miles off in the distance like you usually hear during hunting season. This felt nearby. I sat still, listening. Sometimes people get closer than you think out there. Sound carries weird in the woods. I told myself it was probably someone on the other side of the ridge or something. Still, it felt closer than that. I waited a minute or two, scanning the area, listening for any movement or voices. Nothing. Just quiet again. I stayed where I was, trying to settle back in. Then I heard the second shot. This one was even worse. Not just close. It sounded like it hit something, a sharp crack like wood snapping. And it came from behind me, not far, close enough that my body reacted before my brain did. I ducked slightly, turning my head to look back through the trees. My heart was already picking up. I scanned the area, trying to see any movement. Nothing. No one walking. No voices. No sign of anyone. But that shot, it didn't sound like it came from far away. It sounded like it came from somewhere close behind me. That's when it hit me. Someone might not know I was there. Or worse, they did. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the thought was there. I stayed still for a few seconds, trying to think it through. Then I raised my voice, not yelling aggressively, just loud enough to carry. "Hey, I'm over here." My voice echoed a little through the trees. I waited. Nothing. No response. No movement. Just silence. I called out again. Same thing. Nothing. That's when the uneasiness turned into something heavier. Because if it was another hunter, they should have answered. Even just a quick acknowledgement. But there was nothing. I sat there for another minute, trying to listen for anything. Any sign of someone moving away. Nothing. It was like whoever fired those shots just stopped or didn't care. I didn't want to sit there anymore. Not after that. I started packing up slowly, trying not to make too much noise, but also not trying to be quiet about it either. I wanted to be heard, to make it obvious someone was there. As I stood up and started moving, I kept glancing back over my shoulder. Every sound felt sharper now. Leaves under my boots, branches brushing against my jacket. I kept expecting to hear something else. Another shot. Movement. Anything. But there was nothing. I moved steadily, heading back the way I came. Not running, but not taking my time either. About halfway back, I stopped for a second and listened again. Still nothing. No voices, no footsteps. Just the wind. It didn't make sense. Someone had fired at least 2 shots, close enough that I felt it. And then, nothing. I kept going. The closer I got to the trail, the more I relaxed a little, but it never fully went away. That feeling stayed there, sitting in the back of my chest. I made it back to my truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles nearby, no sign anyone else had been there. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I didn't go back out that day, and I haven't gone back to that exact spot since. Maybe it was just someone careless. Maybe they didn't realize how close they were shooting to someone else. But that second shot, the way it hit something behind me, and the fact that no one answered when I called out, that's the part I can't shake. Because it didn't feel like an accident. It felt too close and too quiet afterward. My name's Nate Holloway. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where you spend a lot of time outside whether you want to or not. Hunting was just something everyone did. My dad taught me when I was young, and I've kept at it ever since. These days, I mostly go alone. It's quiet, and I like having a routine spot I can rely on. I work a regular job doing maintenance for a local school, so getting out into the woods on weekends is something I look forward to. This happened last fall, early November. I'd been hunting the same piece of public land for a couple weeks. It's a decent-sized area, not completely remote, but big enough that you can go stretches without seeing anyone if you get there early. I had a spot I liked about a mile in. There was a faint trail leading to it. Nothing official, just something worn in over time by people cutting through. I'd used it enough that I knew every turn without thinking. The day before this happened, everything had been normal. No signs of other hunters nearby, no fresh tracks that stood out, nothing unusual. So the next morning, I went back out like usual. Same time, just before sunrise. It was cold, a light frost on the ground, and everything had that quiet, still feeling. I parked in the same spot and started walking in. At first, nothing felt different. Same trail, same sounds. But about 10 minutes in, I noticed something tied to a branch ahead of me. A strip of orange tape. It caught the light just enough to stand out. I stopped for a second, looking at it. At first, I figured maybe someone had marked a trail or something. That happens sometimes. But I didn't remember seeing it the day before. I walked a little closer. It was fresh, bright color, not faded or worn, just tied loosely around a branch at about chest height. I stood there for a second, trying to remember if I'd somehow missed it before. It didn't feel likely. I'm used to noticing things like that. Still, I shrugged it off and kept going. A few minutes later, I saw another one. Same kind of tape, tied the same way. This time I stopped longer, because now it didn't feel like something I just overlooked. 2 markers, spaced out along the exact path I always took. I turned slightly, scanning the woods around me. Nothing stood out, no movement, no sound beyond the usual. I told myself it was probably someone marking their way in or out. Maybe another hunter had started using the same path. That was normal enough. Still, something about it didn't sit right. I kept walking. Another strip, then another. All spaced out, leading in the exact direction I was heading. Not branching off, not marking a different route, just following the trail I always took. At that point, I slowed down, started paying more attention. Each piece of tape looked new. No dirt, no wear, like they'd all been put up recently. I tried to think back to the day before. I was sure they hadn't been there. There's no way I would have missed that many. I kept going anyway. But now I felt more aware. Every sound stood out more. Leaves under my boots, branches shifting. Normal stuff, but it all felt sharper. After another 10 minutes, I reached the last stretch before my spot, and there was one more piece of tape. Tied to a branch right near where I usually set up. That's when I stopped completely. Just stood there looking at it, because now it didn't feel random anymore. The tape didn't just mark the trail, it led directly to my spot, exactly where I always went. I looked past it, toward where my blind was set up. Everything looked the same, no obvious disturbance, but I didn't move right away. I just stood there, trying to think it through. Maybe someone else had been using the same area. Maybe they'd found the trail and decided to mark it for themselves. That was possible. But the timing, the fact that it all showed up overnight, and that it led exactly to where I sat, it didn't feel like coincidence. I stepped forward slowly, moving toward my blind. As I got closer, I noticed something else. The ground looked slightly disturbed, not torn up or anything obvious, just small signs. Leaves shifted in places I didn't remember touching. A faint boot print that wasn't mine. That's when that uneasy feeling really settled in. I walked up to my blind and looked around. Everything was still there, nothing missing, nothing obviously moved, but it didn't feel untouched. It felt like someone had been there recently. I stood there for a minute, listening, trying to pick up any sound. Nothing. Just quiet. I looked back down the trail at the line of orange tape leading in. It felt too deliberate, like someone had mapped out exactly how to get to that spot. And if they knew that path, they knew where I'd be sitting. I didn't want to stay there anymore. I packed up slowly, keeping my movements calm. I didn't rush, but I didn't waste time either. As I started heading back out, I kept glancing at the tape, each piece catching my eye as I passed. It felt different now, not like trail markers, more like something guiding someone in or marking something out. I didn't see anyone on the way back. No movement, no sound beyond the usual. I made it back to my truck without anything happening, but I couldn't shake it. The way the tape led straight to my spot, the way it hadn't been there the day before, and how fresh it all looked. I went back once after that a few days later just to check. The tape was gone, every piece of it, like it had never been there. But I didn't go back again after that, because I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had put it there for a reason, and that reason had something to do with me being in that exact spot. My name's Eric Nolan. I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind where hunting season is just part of life. My dad got me into it when I was young, and I stuck with it. These days, I mostly bow hunt when I can, just to get out of the house and clear my head. I work a regular job doing HVAC installs, so most of my time is busy, and being alone in the woods has always been something I enjoy. This happened 2 seasons ago, early November. I'd gone out before sunrise to a piece of public land I'd hunted a few times before. It's a pretty big area, lots of thick woods, some small clearings, and a few trails. But once you get deep enough in, it's easy to feel like you're the only one out there. It was cold that morning, not freezing, but enough that you could see your breath. There was a light layer of leaves on the ground, still damp from the night before. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet you get before the sun comes up. I walked in about a mile, found a spot near a narrow clearing, and set up. I was sitting on a small stool against a tree, bough resting across my lap, just waiting. For the first hour or so, nothing unusual happened, just the normal sounds. Wind in the trees, a squirrel moving around somewhere off to my left, that kind of thing. At some point, after the sun had come up enough to see clearly, I caught movement ahead of me. I looked up, focusing through the trees. That's when I saw it. Someone standing out there, about 50 yards away, wearing orange. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's hunting season. People wear orange, that's normal, but they weren't moving. They were just standing there between 2 trees, facing in my direction. I sat still for a second, watching. I figured maybe they'd seen me and were just making sure what I was before moving on. So I raised my hand slightly and gave a small wave. No reaction. They didn't move, didn't raise a hand, didn't shift their stance, just stayed there. I remember thinking maybe they didn't see me clearly yet, so I adjusted slightly, making myself a little more visible. Still nothing. At that point, it started to feel a little off. Not alarming, just strange. Most hunters will acknowledge you somehow, even just a nod or a wave back. This person didn't do anything. They were just standing there. I kept watching for a few more seconds, trying to figure out what they were doing. They weren't holding a bow that I could see. Didn't look like they were aiming anything, just standing. Then I glanced down for a second, just to adjust my grip on the bow. When I looked back up, they were gone, completely gone. I sat there staring at the spot where they'd been. Nothing, no movement, no sign of anyone walking away. No branches moving, no leaves crunching. Just empty space between the trees. That's when the feeling shifted. Because at that distance, if someone turned and walked off, I should have seen something, or at least heard it. But there was nothing. I stayed still for a minute, listening, trying to pick up any sound. Nothing. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. I told myself maybe they just moved quickly and I missed it. Maybe they stepped behind a tree and kept going. It didn't feel right, but it was the only explanation that made sense. I stayed in that spot for another 20 minutes or so, but I couldn't shake it. I kept looking back at that area, expecting to see movement again. Nothing. Eventually, I decided to move. I stood up slowly, grabbed my gear, and started walking in the direction where I'd seen them. Not quickly, just enough to check it out. As I got closer, I scanned the ground, looking for tracks. The leaves were soft enough that you should see something if someone had just walked through. But I didn't see anything. No clear footprints, no disturbed leaves that stood out. I kept moving forward, stepping carefully, listening. Still nothing. When I reached the spot where they had been standing, I stopped, looked around, same thing. Just trees. Quiet. No sign anyone had been there. That's when I started feeling that heavier unease. Because if someone had been there, they had to have gone somewhere. And I hadn't heard or seen anything. I stood there for a minute, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to stay and keep hunting, but another part of me didn't like the idea of sitting still after that. I started walking back toward my original path, slower this time, more aware of everything around me. Every small sound stood out more. Leaves shifting, branches creaking, normal stuff, but now it all felt different. About halfway back, I thought I heard something behind me, just a faint crunch. I stopped immediately, turned around, nothing, just trees. I listened hard, no follow-up sound. I told myself it was probably just something small, an animal, maybe. But I didn't like it. I kept moving. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Softer this time, behind me. I stopped again, turned around, still nothing. At that point, I didn't wait. I kept walking a little faster now, not running, but not taking my time either. I didn't hear anything else after that. I made it back to the trail, then back to my truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles in the lot, no sign anyone else had been there. I sat in my truck for a minute before starting it, just thinking, maybe it was another hunter. Maybe I just missed them leaving. But I can't shake how still they were, and how they didn't react at all when I waved. And the fact that they were just gone, without a sound. Without any sign of where they went. I still hunt, but I don't go that deep into that area alone anymore. Not after that. My name's Justin Hale. I grew up in a small town in eastern Kentucky, surrounded by woods and hills. Hunting's just part of life there. My dad took me out when I was a kid, and I never really stopped going. These days, I usually go alone. It's quieter that way, and I've always liked being out there by myself. I work during the week doing equipment maintenance, so getting into the woods on weekends is about the only time I get to slow down. This happened last season, mid-November. I had a spot I liked on a piece of private land a friend let me use. It wasn't huge, but it was far enough off the road that you didn't see many people. I'd been hunting it for a few weeks already that year, and I knew the trails pretty well. There was one path I always took in. It cut through a narrow stretch of woods, then opened up into a small clearing where I usually set up. Nothing fancy, just a stool and a good tree for cover. I went out one afternoon, planning to sit until dark. It was cold but not terrible. Overcast, no wind, the kind of quiet day where sound carries more than you expect. I parked where I always did and started walking in. Same path, same pace. Everything felt normal at first. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something ahead of me. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or a branch catching the light wrong. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was a tree stand, strapped to a tree just off the side of the trail. I stopped, just stood there looking at it. Because I knew that tree. I'd walked past it every time I came out there, and there had never been a stand there before. I stepped a little closer, trying to make sense of it. It was one of those metal ladder stands, the kind you strap tight against the trunk. Not old either. The metal looked clean, no rust, no wear. The straps were tight, fresh. It didn't look like it had been sitting there for years. It looked recent. And the way it was positioned, and the way... That's what got me. It was facing directly toward the trail, not angled out into the woods where you'd expect someone to watch for deer. It was pointed straight at where I was standing, at the path I always took in. I remember feeling that first real shift in my stomach, like something wasn't right. I told myself maybe someone else had permission to hunt the land. Maybe my friend forgot to mention it. That was the only explanation that made sense. Still, I stood there for a minute, just looking at it. Then I noticed the ground underneath. There were cigarette butts scattered around the base of the tree. Not a huge pile, but enough to stand out. fresh too. The paper wasn't soaked or broken down. They looked like they'd been dropped recently. I don't smoke, and I knew my friend didn't either. I crouched down a little, looking closer. There were a few boot prints in the dirt as well. Nothing unusual by themselves, but paired with everything else, they felt different, like someone had been spending time right there. Not just setting it up and leaving. Leaving. Sitting. Waiting. I stood back up and looked at the stand again, trying to picture someone sitting up there, watching the trail, watching me walk in. That thought stuck harder than I expected because I'd already been out there a few times that season, walking that exact path. And if the stand hadn't been there before, then it meant it had gone up recently, after I'd already been using that trail. I stayed there for a few minutes, just thinking it through. Part of me wanted to keep going, act like it didn't matter, but another part of me couldn't shake the feeling, the way it was positioned, the cigarette butts, the fact that it hadn't been there before. I decided to keep going, but I was more aware now, more alert. I moved slower, listening more. Every small sound stood out, leaves shifting, branches creaking, normal things, but now they felt louder. I made it to my usual spot and sat down, but I couldn't settle in. My focus kept drifting back to that stand, to the idea of someone sitting there watching the trail, watching me. After about 20 minutes, I thought I heard something. Faint, like a branch snapping somewhere behind me. I froze, turned my head slightly, listening. Nothing, just silence again. I told myself it was probably an animal, but I couldn't relax. I kept scanning the woods, checking behind me more than I normally would. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Another small sound, closer this time. I stood up slowly, not making any sudden movements, just trying to listen. Still nothing clear. No movement I could see. But that feeling was there now. That sense that I wasn't alone. I stayed for maybe another 10 minutes before I decided I was done. It wasn't worth it. I packed up quietly and started heading back the way I came. As I got closer to the trail, I slowed down even more. I didn't like the idea of walking past that stand again. When I finally came into view of it, I stopped, just stood there for a second, looking up, half expecting to see someone sitting there. There wasn't anyone. The stand was empty. But the way it faced the trail, it still felt wrong. I moved past it quickly, not stopping this time, got back to my truck and left. I called my friend later that night and asked him about it. He told me he hadn't put any stand out there, and he hadn't given anyone else permission to hunt that land. That was enough for me. I never went back to that spot. Maybe it was just someone sneaking onto the property. Maybe it was nothing. But the way that stand was set up, facing the trail like that, I'd overheard like it was meant to watch someone coming in. I couldn't get past that, and I didn't want to find out who had been sitting there. My name's Kyle Mercer. I grew up in a small town in southern Indiana, mostly farmland with pockets of woods all over. Hunting was just part of life there. My dad got me into it early, and I stuck with it. These days, I still go out whenever I can, usually on weekends. I work a regular job at a machine shop, so getting out into the woods is kind of my break from everything else. This happened last fall, during deer season. I had permission to hunt on a piece of private property owned by a guy my dad knows. It's a decent-sized stretch of land, mostly woods with a few open patches. I'd been out there a couple times already that season and hadn't run into anyone else. I got there early that morning, just before sunrise. It was cold, not freezing, but enough that the air had that sharp edge to it. The ground was damp from the night before, leaves soft underfoot. I parked near the edge of the property where I always did and started walking in. I had a spot about half a mile in where I liked to sit. Everything felt normal at first, quiet, no wind, just the usual early morning sounds. I got about halfway to my spot when I heard someone walking ahead of me. At first, I thought maybe it was the landowner or someone he'd given permission to. It wasn't impossible. It wasn't I saw him. A guy stepping out from between the trees, maybe 30 yards ahead of me. He had hunting gear on, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw me. I stopped too. We just looked at each other for a second. I raised a hand slightly, said morning. He didn't respond right away, just kind of looked at me. Then he said, "You hunting here?" I told him, yeah, I had permission. He didn't look convinced, or maybe he just didn't like it. He kind of shifted his weight and asked, "Where you headed?" I pointed generally deeper into the woods, said I had a spot back there. He asked, "Where exactly?" The way he said it caught my attention. Not casual, more direct, like he wanted specifics. I hesitated for a second, then just said, "Just back that way." I didn't give him details. He didn't seem to like that. He frowned slightly and said, "I was planning to sit out there this morning." I told him I'd already been using that area a couple times, didn't know anyone else was hunting it. He kind of shrugged, but not in a relaxed way, more like he was annoyed. Then he asked again, "So where are you going to sit?" That's when it started to feel off. Most hunters don't press like that. You give a general direction, and that's enough. You don't ask for someone's exact spot. I just said, "I'll figure it out when I get there." He looked at me for another second, then nodded slowly. Didn't say anything else. Just turned and started walking off, but not deeper into the woods. He went off to the side, kind of circling around. That stuck with me. I stood there for a second, watching him disappear between the trees. Then I kept going. But now I was more aware. That interaction didn't feel normal. I made it to my spot and got set up, but I couldn't fully settle in. I kept thinking about the way he asked those questions, about where I was going to sit. It felt too focused, too specific. I stayed there for a couple hours, didn't see anything. Didn't hear him again either. Eventually, late morning, I decided to head back. As I walked out, I kept looking around more than usual. Listening. But everything felt quiet again, normal. When I got closer to where I'd parked, I slowed down a bit. You can usually see part of the clearing before you step out of the trees. I caught movement near my truck. I stopped immediately, stood still, and watched. At first, I thought maybe it was just something small. An animal, maybe? But then I saw a shape move behind the truck, human height. I stayed where I was, partly hidden by the trees, watching. The movement stopped. Then nothing. No one stepped out, no sound, just stillness. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Then I moved a little closer, carefully. When I stepped into the clearing, there was no one there, just my truck, sitting exactly where I left it. I looked around. Nothing. No other vehicles, no one walking away. No sound, but something felt wrong. I walked up to the truck slowly. That's when I noticed the driver's side door. It wasn't fully closed, just slightly open. Enough that the latch hadn't caught. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I always double check, especially out there. I stood there for a second, just looking at it, trying to think. Maybe I hadn't shut it all the way. Maybe it was nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. I opened the door fully and looked inside. Nothing obvious was missing. Everything looked the same. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, close enough to my truck, close enough to touch it. I looked around again. The clearing was empty. The woods were quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, thinking about that guy from earlier, the way he kept asking where I was going to sit, and then seeing movement near my truck hours later. It could have been a coincidence, maybe it was, but it didn't feel like one. I started the engine and left. I haven't gone back to that property since. Maybe I should have said something to the owner, maybe I still will, but the way that guy acted and the fact that my door was open when I got back, it stuck with me because it didn't feel like someone just passing through. It felt like someone trying to figure out exactly where I'd be and what I'd leave behind. My name's Aaron Whitaker. I grew up in a small town in eastern Kentucky, surrounded by hills and woods. Hunting was just part of growing up there. My dad took me out as soon as I was old enough to walk quietly, and we kept it up every year. Even now, it's one of the few things we still do together regularly. I work construction during the week, and he's semi-retired, so those mornings out in the woods are kind of our thing. This happened a few seasons ago, late November. We were hunting on a stretch of state land we hadn't been to in a while. It's a big area. Most people stick to the easier access points. We decided to go deeper in, somewhere we hadn't really explored much before. We got there early, just before sunrise. It was cold, not snowing, but close enough that the ground was stiff and the air had that sharp bite to it. Everything felt quiet in that early morning way. We walked in for maybe 40 minutes, following a faint trail before cutting off into thicker woods. The further we went, the quieter it got. No distant road noise, no other hunters we could hear, just us and the woods. After a while, we started noticing small signs that people had been through there at some point. Old footprints, nothing fresh, a couple broken branches that didn't look natural, stuff you see on public land sometimes, but nothing that stood out. Then my dad stopped, just raised his hand slightly, signaling me to stop too. I came up next to him and followed his line of sight. At first, I didn't see anything, then I noticed it. A small clearing ahead, partially hidden by brush, and in the middle of it, a campsite. Not a normal one. There was no tent, no fire pit that looked recently used, just a small cluster of things laid out on the ground. We moved a little closer, slow and quiet. The closer we got, the more it felt off. There were a couple blankets spread out and folded in a way that didn't look like they'd been left by accident. Some canned food stacked to one side, a plastic container with a lid, like something you'd use for storage. No hunting gear, no sign of weapons, no tools, just supplies. It didn't look like someone camping for a night or two. It looked like someone staying there, for a while. I remember looking at my dad, and he had that same expression I was feeling. Confused, trying to make sense of it. We stepped into the edge of the clearing, careful not to disturb anything. The ground looked worn down in spots, like someone had been moving around there regularly. There was no fire going, but I could see where one had been before. Ash, old and cold. I crouched down slightly, looking at the canned food. Some of it was unopened. Some had been opened and left nearby. It didn't look like trash. It looked used. Like someone was coming back to it. I remember saying quietly, "You think someone's living out here?" My dad didn't answer right away. He was looking around, scanning the trees beyond the clearing. That's when I started noticing how quiet it was. Not just normal quiet, still, like everything had stopped. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds just looking around. Then we heard it. A cough. Not loud, not far away, close, somewhere just beyond the trees at the edge of the clearing. We both froze, didn't move, didn't speak. The cough wasn't like someone clearing their throat casually. It sounded rough, like someone who'd been out in the cold too long. I slowly turned my head, trying to pinpoint where it came from, but it was hard to tell. It echoed just enough through the trees. My dad shifted slightly next to me. I could feel the tension in the way he moved. We didn't say anything. We just listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just silence again. But now it felt different. Heavier. Like we weren't alone anymore. I remember thinking whoever made that sound had been close enough to hear us, to know we were there, and they hadn't said anything, hadn't made any effort to show themselves, just that one cough. We stayed there for a few more seconds, long enough for the reality of it to sink in. Then my dad leaned in slightly and said very quietly, "We're leaving." I nodded. We didn't rush, but we didn't waste time either. We stepped back out of the clearing, moving slowly at first, trying not to make too much noise. Once we were a little further into the trees, we picked up the pace, still quiet, but definitely moving with purpose now. Neither of us looked back right away. After maybe 20 yards, I glanced over my shoulder. The clearing was still there, partially visible through the trees, nothing moving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from somewhere we couldn't see. We kept walking, didn't stop, didn't talk. After a few minutes, I thought I heard something behind us, a faint rustle. I stopped for half a second, but my dad didn't. He just kept moving and said, "Keep going." So I did. We didn't hear anything else after that, at least not anything clear. But the whole walk back felt different. Every sound made me turn my head. Every shadow looked like it could be something else. We got back to the truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles, no sign of anyone nearby. We sat there for a minute before leaving. Neither of us said much at first. Eventually, I asked him what he thought. He just shook his head, said he didn't like it. That was enough for me. We never went back to that area. Maybe it was just someone trying to stay off the grid, living out there quietly. But the way they didn't make themselves known, the way they stayed hidden, even after we walked right into their space, that's what stuck with me. Because it didn't feel like we stumbled onto something. It felt like we walked into someone's place and they chose not to let us see them. My name's Derek Shaw. I grew up in a small mountain town in western North Carolina. Hunting was just part of life there. My dad and older brother both did it, so I got into it early and stuck with it. These days, I don't get out as often as I used to, but I still try to go a few times each season. I usually hunt alone now. I work during the week doing carpentry, so those quiet mornings in the woods are kind of the only time I really get to slow down. This happened last fall, late October. I was hunting up in the mountains on a stretch of public land and I'd been using for a couple years. It's not easy to get to, which is why I like it. You have to park off a narrow gravel road and hike in about a mile and a half, mostly uphill. Because of that, you don't run into many people. I got there early that morning, just before sunrise. It was cold, a little fog hanging low in the valleys, and everything had that damp, quiet feel. The kind of morning where sound carries but also feels muted at the same time. I made the hike in, took my time, and got to my usual spot. It's a small area near a ridge with a natural path deer tend to use. I don't have a permanent stand there, just a spot I like to sit against a tree. Everything felt normal at first. Quiet, still. I sat there for a couple hours without seeing much, just the usual sounds, leaves shifting, a few birds here and there. Around mid-morning, I decided to move a little further along the ridge. Sometimes I'll shift spots if things feel dead. I packed up and started walking slowly, scanning as I went. That's when I saw it. A backpack, hanging from a branch, about chest height, just off to the side of the path I was walking. I stopped immediately, just stood there looking at it, because it didn't belong there. Not in a way that felt normal. Hunters sometimes leave things behind, sure, but this didn't look abandoned. It looked placed, deliberately. The bag itself looked newer, not worn out or faded. Dark color, zipped up, straps hanging down slightly. I stepped a little closer, but not all the way up to it, just enough to get a better look. There were no other items around it, no sign of a campsite, no gear laid out, just the bag, hanging there. I remember looking around, expecting to see someone nearby. Nothing, just trees and quiet. I told myself maybe someone had left it there while scouting or moving around. Still, something about it didn't sit right. The way it was positioned, right off the path. At a height where it was easy to grab, like it was meant to be accessed quickly. I stood there for a minute, debating whether to even touch it. Part of me wanted to just leave it alone and keep moving, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer and reached out, unzipping it slowly. Inside, there were a few things. Snacks, protein bars, a couple bottles of water, nothing unusual at first. Then I saw the map, folded up, tucked in one of the compartments. I pulled it out, unfolded it. It was a map of the area, not just general terrain, specific sections of the land, and there were circles drawn on it, several of them, marked in pen, different spots across the map. I looked closer, and that's when I recognized one of them, the spot I'd been sitting at that morning. It was circled, clearly, not just roughly marked, exactly where I usually sit. I felt that drop in my stomach right away, because that wasn't random, that was specific. I kept looking at the map. There were other circles too, other areas nearby, some I recognized, some I didn't. But they were all hunting spots, good ones, the kind people find after spending time out there. I stood there for a few seconds, just holding the map, trying to make sense of it. Then I looked back at the bag, at the supplies inside. It didn't look like someone had forgotten it. It looked like someone was using it, coming back to it. I suddenly became very aware of how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just me standing there with someone else's stuff, in the middle of the woods. I slowly folded the map back up and put it where I found it, zipped the bag back up, and stepped away. At that point, I didn't want to stay there anymore. I didn't want to keep hunting. I didn't want to move deeper into the area. I just wanted to leave. I started heading back the way I came. Not fast at first, just steady. But I kept looking around more than usual, listening. Every sound felt sharper. Leaves under my boots, branches brushing against my jacket. At one point, I thought I heard something behind me, a faint shift. I stopped, turned around, nothing, just trees. I stood there for a few seconds, listening, nothing else. I told myself it was probably nothing, but I didn't like it. I kept moving, a little faster now. The further I got from that spot, the more uneasy I felt. Because the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. That map, those circles, and the fact that one of them was exactly where I'd been sitting. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like someone had been watching those areas, tracking them, maybe even the people using them. I made it back to the trail and then down to my truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles in the lot, no sign anyone else had been there. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, looking out at the woods. Everything looked normal, quiet, still, but it didn't feel that way anymore. I haven't gone back to that area since. Maybe it was just another hunter keeping track of spots. Maybe it was harmless. But the way that bag was set up and how my exact spot was marked on that map, it didn't feel like someone just scouting. It felt like someone paying close attention. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew more about me being out there than I was comfortable with. My name's Dylan Reeves. I grew up in a small town in central Pennsylvania, mostly woods and back roads, not much else. Hunting was just part of growing up there. My dad and uncle both did it, and I got into it early. These days, I still go out whenever I can, usually alone. I work a pretty normal job during the week doing maintenance at a warehouse, so getting out into the woods is kind of my reset. This happened last November during rifle season. I was hunting on a piece of public land I'd been using for a couple years. It's a decent area, but if you go far enough in, you can usually find some quiet spots where you won't run into anyone. That morning, I got there just before sunrise. It was cold, a light frost on the ground, and the air had that still feeling where everything carries just a little farther than usual. I parked at the usual pull-off, grabbed my gear, and started hiking in. About halfway to my spot, I stopped and tied my orange safety vest to a low branch near the trail. I do that sometimes so I don't overheat walking in, then grab it again on the way out. It's something I've done plenty of times. I remember exactly where I left it. Low branch, maybe chest height, right next to a bend in the trail where it curves around a big tree. After that, I kept going. I got to my spot, settled in, and spent most of the morning there. Nothing unusual happened while I was hunting. No other hunters passed through. No voices, no movement that stood out, just the normal quiet. Around midday, I decided to head back. I hadn't seen anything, and I figured I'd call it early. The walkout started normal. Same trail, same pace. Everything felt quiet again. As I got closer to where I'd left my vest, I started thinking about it, just out of habit, making sure I didn't forget to grab it. When I came up to that bend in the trail, I looked toward the branch where I'd left it, and it wasn't there. I stopped, just stood there for a second, looking at the branch, empty. I stepped closer, thinking maybe it had fallen. Maybe the wind knocked it loose or something. But it hadn't been windy at all that morning, and there was nothing on the ground, no vest, no sign of it. That's when I started to feel that first bit of unease, because I knew I'd left it there. I don't misplace things like that. Not out there. I looked around a bit more, scanning the ground, checking nearby branches. Nothing. Then I noticed something further down the trail, maybe 20 or 30 yards ahead, something orange, hanging from another tree. I walked toward it slowly, and sure enough, it was vetch, tied to a branch, higher up than where I'd left it. Different tree, different spot. I stopped a few feet away from it, just looking at it because there was no way it got there on its own. It hadn't fallen and somehow ended up hanging from another branch. Someone had moved it. I looked around the woods, nothing, no movement, no sound, just quiet. That's when it hit me. Someone had been there, close enough to see my vest, close enough to walk up to it, untie it, carry it down the trail, and hang it somewhere else, and I hadn't seen or heard them. I stood there for a minute, trying to think it through. Maybe another hunter came through, saw it and moved it for some reason. But why? Why not just leave it where it was? Or take it? Why move it a short distance down the trail and hang it again? It didn't make sense. I reached up and grabbed it, untied it, and put it on. My hands felt a little tighter than usual. Not shaking, tense. I kept looking around as I did it, half expecting to see someone standing somewhere nearby, watching. But there was nothing. I started walking again, back toward the truck. But now I was paying more attention. Every sound stood out more. Leaves under my boots, branches shifting. At one point, I thought I heard something behind me, a faint crunch. I stopped, turned around. Nothing, just the trail. I waited a few seconds, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was probably just something small, an animal, but it didn't feel like that. I kept walking. a little faster now. Not running, but definitely not taking my time. After a few minutes, I heard it again, another faint sound behind me. I didn't turn around that time. I just kept moving, focused on getting back to the truck. The closer I got to the trailhead, the more I relaxed a little. But that feeling didn't go away. That sense that that sense that I wasn't alone, that someone had been close enough to my stuff to touch it, to move it, without me noticing. I made it back to my truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles in the lot, no sign anyone else had been there. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, looking out at the woods. Everything looked normal, quiet, still, but it didn't feel that way anymore. I haven't gone back to that spot since. Maybe it was just another hunter messing around. Maybe there's some simple explanation. But the fact that someone had been that close and I never saw or heard them, that's what stuck with me. Because it means they knew I was there and I had no idea they were anywhere near me. My name's Logan Pierce. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, surrounded by woods and farmland. Hunting was just part of life there. My uncle and my older cousins got me into it when I was a kid, and it stuck. These days I don't get out as often as I used to, but when I do, it's usually with my cousin Matt. We've been hunting together since we were teenagers, so it's kind of a routine at this point. This happened a couple winters ago, late in the season, and there had been a fresh snowfall the night before. Not too deep, just enough to cover everything clean. Perfect for tracking. Matt and I met up early that morning and headed out to a piece of public land we'd used before. It's a big area, mostly woods, with a few narrow trails cutting through it. Not completely isolated, but quiet enough if you get far enough in. The air was cold and still, the kind of cold that makes everything feel sharper. The snow made it even quieter, muffling our steps as we walked. We found tracks pretty quickly. Deer, fresh ones, clear impressions in the snow, easy to follow. So we started tracking, moving slow, staying quiet, just like we always do. For the first half hour or so, everything was normal. Just us following the trail, keeping an eye ahead, listening. Then Matt stopped. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed down and slightly off to the side of the trail. I looked where he was pointing. There were footprints. Human, running parallel to ours. Just inside the tree line. Not on the trail, not crossing it. Just pacing alongside. I remember crouching down a bit, looking closer. The prints were fresh, same as ours. Same as the deer tracks. They hadn't been there long. That's when I started thinking. We hadn't seen anyone else out there. No other vehicles when we parked. No sounds of other hunters. Nothing. I looked at Matt and asked if he'd seen anyone earlier. He shook his head. We both just stood there for a second, looking at those tracks. Then we kept moving, following the deer trail. But now we were both paying more attention to those footprints. They stayed alongside us, always just inside the trees, never stepping onto the trail, never crossing over, just keeping that same distance. At first, I told myself maybe someone had been walking there earlier, just happened to follow the same direction. But that didn't really make sense. The tracks looked as fresh as ours, like they'd been made at the same time, or close to it. After a few minutes, I started noticing something else. Every time we stopped, the tracks would stop too. We'd stand still, listening. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Then we'd start walking again. And after a short stretch, the tracks would continue, always just off to the side. It didn't feel random. It felt timed, like whoever was making them was moving when we moved, and stopping when we stopped. I remember feeling that shift in my chest, that awareness. Matt noticed it too. He leaned in and said quietly, "You see that?" I nodded. We didn't say much after that. We just kept moving, but slower now. More cautious. Every few minutes I'd glance into the trees, trying to see if I could spot anything. Nothing. Just branches and shadows. The snow should have made it easier to hear someone walking, but we didn't hear anything. No crunching. No snapping branches. Nothing. Just silence. That's what made it worse, because the tracks were there. Proof someone was moving, but we couldn't hear them. After maybe 20 minutes of this, I started feeling uneasy. Not panicked, but definitely on edge. It didn't feel like someone just walking through the woods. It felt like someone staying with us, matching our pace, keeping just out of sight. At one point, I stopped suddenly and turned toward the tree line, just trying to catch something off guard. Nothing. The woods looked completely still. But when I looked back down at the ground, I could see where the tracks had stopped too, right where we had. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't coincidence. Matt whispered, "You want to head back?" I didn't answer right away. I was trying to think it through, but I didn't like it. I didn't like not knowing who was out there or why they were staying just out of sight. So I nodded. We turned around and started heading back the way we came, and the tracks stayed with us. Still off to the side, still inside the tree line, same distance, same pattern. We didn't run, but we definitely didn't take our time. Every now and then I'd glance back or off to the side. Nothing, no movement, no person, just those tracks continuing alongside ours. At one point I thought I heard something, a faint shift in the snow, but it was so subtle I couldn't be sure. We didn't stop to check, we just kept moving. The closer we got to the main trail, the more I started to relax a little, but the tracks didn't stop. They stayed with us almost the entire way, only disappearing when we got close enough to the more open area near where we parked. When we finally stepped out into the clearing, I turned and looked back. The tree line stood there, quiet and still, no movement, no sign of anyone. But I knew those tracks had been there. We'd both seen them. We got back to the truck and didn't say much for a minute, just kind of sat with it. Maybe it was another hunter, maybe someone who didn't want to be seen. But the way they stayed, just out of sight, the way they matched our pace exactly, and the fact that we never heard them, that's what stuck with me, because it didn't feel like someone just passing through it, like someone watching us the whole time and making sure we never saw them. My name's Kevin Brody. I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where you're in the woods more often than not. Hunting was just part of growing up. My dad got me into it early, and even now I still go out whenever I can. These days I usually hunt alone. I work long hours during the week doing mechanical work, so those early mornings in the woods are about the only quiet time I get. This happened last November. I went out to a piece of public land I'd used a few times before. It's a decent-sized area, but if you go early enough and walk far enough in, you don't run into many people. I got there well before sunrise. It was still completely dark when I parked. Cold too, that kind of dry cold where the air feels sharp when you breathe it in. I grabbed my gear and started walking in. The trail I took wasn't official, just a worn path that cuts through the trees. I moved slow, careful with my footing, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. After about 20 minutes, I got close to where I planned to sit. It was a small clearing surrounded by thicker woods, a spot I'd had some luck with before. I found a tree, got settled, and just waited. Everything felt normal at first. Quiet, no wind, just the occasional faint rustle somewhere far off. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, letting things settle when I saw it. A light, off in the distance, moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was another hunter walking in. That's not unusual. The light was low, like someone holding a flashlight pointed toward the ground as they walked. It moved slowly, not fast, not erratic, just a steady pace. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to judge how far away it was. Hard to tell in the dark, but it didn't seem too far. Maybe 50, 60 yards, and it was moving in my direction. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured I'd just let them know I was there so we didn't end up too close to each other. So I called out, not loud, just enough to carry. "Hey, I'm over here." The moment I said it, the light shut off. Instantly, no fade, no hesitation, just gone. That caught me off guard. I sat there for a second, waiting for a response. Nothing, no voice, no movement, just darkness. I told myself maybe they just turned it off to avoid shining it in my direction. Maybe they didn't want to disturb anything. That made sense, kind of. Still, I waited, listening. Nothing. A minute passed. Then 2. Still no sound, no light. I started to feel that slight unease, because if someone was that close, I should have heard something. Footsteps, branches, anything. But there was nothing. I stayed still, trying to listen harder. Then I heard it. A faint step, behind me. I froze. Didn't turn right away. Just listened. Another step. Soft. Measured. Coming from somewhere behind and slightly off to the side. I turned slowly, trying to see through the trees. Nothing. Just darkness. But the sound was there. Another step. Then silence. I didn't say anything this time. I just stayed still, trying to figure out what was happening. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Another step. Different angle this time, like it had shifted position. That's when it hit me. Whoever it was had changed direction. Instead of continuing forward, they were moving around me, circling, slowly. I felt my chest tighten. Not panic, but that sharp awareness that something wasn't right. I kept my head still, listening, trying to track the sound. Every few seconds, another step, then silence. Each time from a slightly different spot, always behind me, always just out of sight. I thought about calling out again, but something about how the light had shut off and how quiet they'd been after that made me hesitate. It didn't feel like someone just passing through. It felt like someone staying close, watching. I shifted slightly in my seat, the tree stand creaking just a little. The footsteps stopped immediately, complete silence. I stayed still, barely breathing. After maybe 10 seconds, another step. Further to the side now, then another. Slow. Deliberate. I turned my head again, trying to catch any movement. Nothing. I couldn't see a shape, no outline, just darkness between the trees. But the sound was real, and it was close. That's when I decided I wasn't staying there. I moved slowly at first, climbing down from the stand as quietly as I could. The moment my boots hit the ground, I heard it again. A step, then another. Still behind me, still keeping that distance. I didn't look back again. I just started walking, not running, but moving steady, focused on getting back to the trail. Every few seconds, I'd hear it. A step, then silence, then another. It stayed with me the whole way, always behind, always just far enough that I couldn't see anything. At one point, I stopped suddenly. The footsteps stopped too, instantly. That was enough. I kept moving, faster now, not caring about being quiet anymore, just wanting to get out. The closer I got to the trail, the more I relaxed a little, but I still heard it once or twice more. Faint, further back, then it stopped completely. I made it back to my truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles in the lot. No sign anyone else had been there. I sat in my truck for a minute before starting it. Just listening. Nothing. Everything felt normal again. But I haven't gone back to that spot since. Maybe it was just another hunter. Maybe they didn't want to be seen. But the way they turned off that light the second I spoke, and then moved around me without making themselves known, it didn't feel like someone who was just out there hunting. It felt like someone who didn't want me to know they were there at all. My name's Marcus Mark Ellison. I grew up in a small town in Western Virginia, mostly woods and rolling hills. Hunting was just something you did there. My dad taught me early on, and I stuck with it. These days, I don't get out as often as I used to, but when I do, I usually go alone. I work long hours doing electrical work, so those quiet sits in the woods are about the only time things slow down. This happened last November. I had permission to hunt on a piece of private land owned by a coworker's uncle. It wasn't huge, but it was quiet, and I'd been out there a couple times already that season without seeing anyone else. That afternoon, I got there around 2, planning to sit until dark. The weather was cool, a little damp, and there wasn't much wind. Leaves were dry enough to crunch underfoot though, which made moving around louder than usual. I walked in about half a mile to a spot where I'd set up a ground blind earlier in the season. It was just a simple one tucked into some brush, positioned to watch a narrow path deer like to use. I got inside, settled in, and let everything go quiet again. For the first hour, nothing felt off. Just normal sounds. Wind through the trees, the occasional bird, leaves shifting somewhere in the distance. As it got later, the woods started to settle down more. That kind of quiet you get toward dusk. That's when I heard it. A footstep, slow, crunching leaves, somewhere off to my left. I stayed still, listening. Another step, same pace, deliberate. At first I thought it was a deer, but it didn't sound right. Too steady, too heavy, and not the kind of stop and go movement you usually hear from animals. I shifted slightly, careful not to make too much noise, and leaned toward the opening of the blind. I expected to see another hunter. That's what made sense. Maybe someone walking through the property without realizing I was there. But when I looked out, I didn't see anyone at first. Just trees. Then I noticed movement, a shape, low to the ground, about 30 yards out behind a tree. I focused on it, and that's when I realized it was a person. Crouched low, not standing, not walking normally, just crouched, half hidden behind the tree, facing my direction, watching the blind. I froze. Didn't move. Didn't breathe for a second. trying to make sure I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. The light was dim, but I could make out enough. Dark clothing, no orange, no visible gear, just someone crouched there, still, looking right at where I was sitting. That's when my stomach dropped, because it didn't look like someone passing through. It looked like someone staying there, watching. I stayed completely still, hoping maybe they hadn't noticed me looking. But something about the way they were positioned, it felt like they already knew. A few seconds passed, then I shifted slightly, just a small movement, and the moment I did, they moved. Quick. Not running, but fast enough that it was sudden. They dropped lower, then moved behind the tree and out of sight. I leaned forward a little more, trying to see where they went. Nothing. Just trees again. No movement. No sound. That's what made it worse. Because the leaves were loud enough that I should have heard them moving away. But I didn't. It was like they disappeared into the brush without making a sound. I stayed there, frozen, listening hard, trying to pick up anything. Footsteps, branches, anything. Nothing. Just silence. My heart was beating harder now. I tried to think it through. Maybe it was another hunter. But why crouch like that? Why hide behind a tree instead of just walking through? And why no orange? None of it added up. I sat there for another minute or two, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call out, let them know I was there. But something about how they'd been watching and how they moved the second I shifted made me hesitate. It didn't feel like someone who wanted to be seen. I stayed still a little longer, then I heard it again. A faint movement, different direction this time. Behind me, not far, just a slight crunch of leaves. I turned my head slowly, trying not to make noise. I couldn't see anything through the back of the blind, just the fabric and shadows, but I knew I'd heard it. That's when I decided I wasn't staying there. I started packing up slowly, trying to keep my movements controlled, but I was definitely on edge now. Every sound felt louder, every movement felt exposed. As I got up to leave the blind, I hesitated for a second, listening. Nothing. Then I stepped out. The woods looked normal, empty, quiet. But it didn't feel empty. I started walking back toward the trail. Not running, but not slow either. After a few steps, I thought I heard something behind me again. Soft, like someone stepping carefully. I didn't turn around that time. I just kept moving, focused on getting out. Every few seconds I'd listen, trying to figure out if it was real or just in my head. But once or twice I heard it again, faint, behind me, keeping distance. I didn't stop. I just kept walking until I reached the main trail. Then the clearing where my truck was. When I stepped out of the woods and saw my truck, I felt a little relief. I looked back once. The tree line stood there, still and quiet. No movement, no sign of anyone. But I knew what I'd seen. I got in my truck, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, just listening. Nothing. Everything felt normal again. But I haven't gone back to that spot since. Maybe it was just someone else on the property. Maybe they didn't realize I was there. But the way they were crouched, the way they were watching the blind, and how they moved the second I noticed them, it didn't feel like someone just passing through. It felt like someone who'd been there for a while, waiting. My name's Evan Carter. I grew up in a small town in southern Ohio, mostly woods and farmland with not much else going on. Hunting was just something everyone did, especially in the fall. My dad got me into it early, and I kept at it into adulthood. These days, I mostly go out alone. I work long hours during the week doing HVAC work, so being out in the woods is about the only time things feel quiet. This happened last season, late October. I went out to a piece of public land I'd used before. It's not huge, but if you walk in far enough, it gets quiet enough that you don't see many people. I got there mid-afternoon, planning to sit until dark. The weather was cool, a little overcast, and there wasn't much wind. The kind of evening where sound carries pretty well. I walked in about half a mile and found a spot near a small clearing. It wasn't anything special, just a place where I'd seen some movement before. I set up against a tree and settled in. For the first hour or so, nothing really happened. Just the usual sounds, leaves shifting, birds now and then, everything normal. At some point, I decided to use a bird call. Just a simple one I carry sometimes. Nothing fancy, just something to break up the silence a bit and maybe get some movement. I gave it a short call, waited. Nothing. I did it again a minute later, same thing. I didn't think much of it. Then, maybe 30 seconds after my second call, I heard it. The same call, from somewhere off to my right. I remember sitting there for a second, trying to process it. It sounded almost identical, same pitch, same length, close enough that it caught me off guard. My first thought was another hunter, maybe someone messing around. People do that sometimes. I turned my head slightly, trying to see through the trees. Nothing, just brush and shadows. I waited, listening. A minute passed. Nothing. So I tried it again. Same call. Short, clear. Then I stayed quiet. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Same sound, same pattern. But this time it came from a different direction, not from the right anymore, more behind me. That's when I felt that first bit of unease, because it didn't feel like someone just echoing me from one spot. It felt like it had moved. I stayed still, listening harder, trying to figure out where exactly it was coming from. But it was hard to tell. The woods were dense enough that sound bounced around a bit. I told myself it was probably just another hunter moving through. Maybe they heard me and were joking around. Still, something about it didn't feel right. Most people would call out, or at least make themselves known. This person wasn't. They were just repeating the call. I didn't use the call again right away. I just sat there, listening. After a minute or so, I heard it again. Same exact sound, this time from further off to the left. A completely different direction than before. That's when it really started to bother me, because now it didn't feel like one person in one spot. It felt like it was moving around me, or like there was more than one. I shifted slightly, trying to stay quiet but adjust my position. I scanned the trees. Still nothing. No movement, no shape, just empty woods. I debated calling out, asking if someone was there, but something about the way it kept repeating the call, without any other noise, made me hesitate. It didn't feel like someone just passing through. It felt intentional, like they were responding, but not actually communicating. I stayed quiet. Another minute passed. Then I heard it again. Same call. Closer this time. Not right next to me, but closer than before. That's when my chest started to tighten a bit, because if someone was that close, I should have seen something, or heard more than just that one sound. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no branches snapping, just that call. Then silence. I decided I was done. It wasn't worth staying. I started packing up slowly, trying not to make too much noise. As I stood up, I heard it again. Same call. From behind me, closer than it had been before. I didn't look back right away. I just focused on getting my gear together, trying to stay calm, trying not to rush too much, but my hands definitely felt tighter than usual. Once I had everything, I started walking back toward the trail. Not fast, but steady. A few steps in, I heard it again. Same sound. Off to the side now, keeping pace. That's what really got to me. It wasn't random. It felt like it was staying with me, moving, stopping I moved, stopping when I stopped, always just out of sight. I didn't use the call again. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. Every few minutes I'd hear it again. Same exact tone, same pattern, always from a slightly different direction. Never in front of me, always to the side or behind. I kept expecting to catch a glimpse of someone, a shape between the trees, but I never did. The woods looked completely empty. That made it worse, because the sound was there, but there was nothing to match it. I picked up my pace a little. Not running, but definitely moving faster than I had before. The closer I got to the trail, the less often I heard it. Or maybe I just noticed it less because I was focused on getting out. Eventually, it stopped completely. I made it back to my truck without seeing anyone. No other vehicles nearby, no sign anyone else had been there. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute. Just listening. Nothing. Everything felt normal again. But I haven't gone back to that spot since. Maybe it was just another hunter messing around. Maybe someone good at mimicking calls, but the way it moved around me, the way it kept that same distance, and how I never saw or heard anything else, it didn't feel like someone just joking around. It felt like someone staying just out of sight and letting me know they were there. My name's Jason Miller. I grew up in a small town in central Pennsylvania, surrounded by woods and farmland. Hunting was just part of growing up there. My dad got me into it when I was a kid, and I've stuck with it ever since. These days, I mostly go alone when I can. I work a steady job doing maintenance at a factory, So getting out into the woods for a few hours is one of the only times things feel quiet. This happened last November. I was hunting on a piece of private land owned by a guy I know through work. He doesn't use it much, and he lets a couple of us hunt there during the season. It's mostly wooded, with a few clearings and some narrow paths that deer like to use. I'd set up a ground blind there earlier in the season. Nothing fancy, just tucked into some brush near a small trail that cuts through the trees. That afternoon, I got there around 3. It was already starting to get that late daylight where everything feels a little dimmer. The air was cold but still, no wind, and the ground was covered in dry leaves. I walked in slow, trying not to make too much noise, and got settled into the blind. At first, everything felt normal. The woods were quiet in that usual way. A few distant sounds here and there, but nothing out of place. I sat there for maybe an hour, just watching the trail, letting my eyes adjust as the light faded. Then I heard it, a footstep. Crunch. Somewhere off to my left. I froze, didn't move, just listened. Another step, same pace, slow, deliberate. At first I thought it might be a deer, but it didn't sound right. Too steady, too spaced out. I leaned slightly toward the opening of the blind, careful not to make noise. I expected to see another hunter walking through. That's what made sense. But when I looked, I didn't see anyone at first. Just trees. Then I noticed something, a shape, low, partially hidden behind a tree about 30 yards out. I focused on it, and that's when I realized it was a person. Crouched down, not standing, not moving normally, just low to the ground. Positioned behind the tree like they were trying to stay out of sight, facing directly toward the blind, toward me. I stopped breathing for a second, trying to make sure I was seeing it right. The light was dim, but I could make out enough. Dark clothing, no orange, no visible gear. Just someone crouched there, still, watching. That's when it hit me. They weren't just passing through, they were staying there, looking right at the blind. I stayed completely still, hoping maybe they hadn't noticed me moving. A few seconds passed. Then I shifted slightly in my seat, just enough that the fabric of the blind made a faint sound. And the second that happened, they moved. Quick, dropped even lower, then moved behind the tree and out of sight. I leaned forward a little, trying to see where they went. Nothing. Just trees again. No movement. No sound. That's what got to me, because the leaves were dry enough that I should have heard them moving away. But I didn't. It was like they knew exactly how to move without making noise. I sat there, frozen, listening hard, trying to hear anything. Footsteps, branches, anything. Nothing. Just silence. My heart was beating faster now. I tried to think it through. Maybe it was another hunter. But that didn't make sense. No orange. No gear. And why crouch like that instead of just walking? Why stay hidden? None of it felt normal. I stayed in the blind for another minute or two, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call out, let them know I was there. But something about the way they'd been watching and how fast they moved when I shifted made me hesitate. It didn't feel like someone who wanted to be seen. Then I heard something else. A faint sound behind me. Just a slight crunch. Not loud, but close. I turned my head slowly, trying to look through the back of the blind. I couldn't see anything, just the fabric and shadows. But I knew I'd heard it. That's when I decided I wasn't staying there. I started packing up slowly, trying to keep my movements controlled, but I was definitely on edge now. Every little sound felt louder. Every movement felt like it gave me away. Once I had everything together, I took a breath and stepped out of the blind. The woods looked normal. Empty. Quiet. But it didn't feel empty. I started walking back toward the trail, not running, but moving steady, focused. After a few steps, I thought I heard something behind me again. Soft, like someone stepping carefully. I didn't turn around, I just kept moving, trying to stay calm, trying not to let it get to me. But once or twice I heard it again. Faint, behind me, keeping distance. I didn't stop, I just kept walking until I reached the main trail. Then out to the clearing where my truck was parked. When I stepped out of the woods and saw my truck, I felt some relief. I looked back once. The tree line stood there, still and quiet. No movement, no sign of anyone. But I knew what I'd seen. I got in my truck, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, just listening. Nothing. Everything felt normal again. But I haven't gone back to that spot since. Maybe it was just someone else on the property. Maybe they didn't realize I was there. But the way they were crouched, the way they were watching the blind, and how they disappeared. The second I moved, it didn't feel like someone just passing through. It felt like someone waiting for me to make a mistake. My name's Cole Ramirez. I grew up in a small town in South Texas, not far from a bunch of ranch land and brush country. Hunting's always been normal there, especially hog hunting at night. It's something I started doing with friends in my early 20s, and I still go when I can. I work construction during the day, so those late night hunts are kind of a break, even if they're not exactly relaxing. This happened about a year ago. I was out with my buddy Nate on a piece of land his uncle owns. It's pretty big, mostly thick brush with some open patches, and there's a lot of hog activity out there, especially at night. We got there just after sunset and waited a bit before heading in. By the time we started walking, it was fully dark. No moon that night, just black sky and whatever light we had from our headlamps. The air was warm, a little humid, and there wasn't much wind. The kind of night where sound carries farther than you expect. We were walking slow, scanning with our lights, keeping an eye out for movement, talking quietly here and there, just normal stuff. After maybe 20 minutes, I noticed something off to the side. Another light. At first, I thought it was just Nate's beam catching something weird through the brush, but when I looked again, it was separate, distinct. A white light moving between the trees. Off to our right, I stopped and pointed it out. Nate saw it too. We both just stood there for a second, watching. The light moved slowly, not flickering, not bouncing like someone running, just steady, moving parallel to us. Same direction, same general pace. I remember thinking it had to be another hunter. That was the only thing that made sense. It wasn't super common to run into people out there at night, but it wasn't impossible either. I raised my voice a little and called out, "Hey!" The light didn't change, didn't turn toward us, didn't stop, just kept moving. That was the first thing that felt off. Most people would at least acknowledge you, even just a quick callback. But there was nothing. We stood there for a bit longer, watching it. Then we started moving again. Slow, careful, and the light stayed with us. Always off to the side, never getting closer, never falling behind, just matching our pace. After a few minutes, I tried calling out again, louder this time. "Hey! You out here?" Still nothing. No voice. No shift in movement, just that same steady light moving through the brush. I remember looking at Nate, and he had that same expression I felt, confused, trying to figure it out. We kept going, but now we were more aware. Every few steps we'd glance over, same thing, light moving parallel. At one point we stopped completely. The light stopped too, right when we did. That's when my stomach tightened a bit, because that didn't feel random. We stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I took a couple steps forward, and almost immediately, the light started moving again. Same direction, same pace, like it was tracking us. That's when we both went quiet. No more talking, just listening. The woods were still, aside from our own footsteps, and that light moving through the trees. After maybe 15 minutes of this, it started to feel wrong. Not just another hunter. If it was, why not say anything? Why stay that far off? Why match us exactly? I whispered to Nate that maybe we should head back. He nodded. Neither of us liked it, so we turned around and started heading back toward where we came in. The light adjusted too, stayed on the same side, still parallel, still matching us. At one point, I slowed down. The light slowed down. I stopped. The light stopped. That's when it really hit me. Whoever it was, they were paying attention, watching us. I didn't like that at all. I told Nate we should turn our lights off for a second, just to see what happened. He hesitated, but agreed. We both shut our lights off. The woods went completely dark. For a second, there was nothing. Then that other light, it shut off too. Immediately. No delay. Just gone. That moment stuck with me more than anything else, because it meant they were watching us closely enough to react right away. We stood there in the dark for a few seconds, neither of us moving, just listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I turned my light back on. The woods came back into view, empty. I looked toward where the other light had been. Nothing there, no glow, no movement. It was just gone. We didn't wait around after that. We started walking back faster. Not running, but definitely moving with purpose. I kept glancing over to the side, expecting to see the light again, but it never came back on. No sound either. No sign of anyone. We made it back to the truck without seeing anything else. No other vehicles, no one around, just us. We sat there for a minute before leaving. Neither of us really knew what to say. Maybe it was another hunter who didn't want to be seen. Maybe someone messing around. But the way they stayed with us, the way they matched our pace exactly, and how they shut their light off the second we did, that's what stuck. Because it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like someone watching us and making sure we knew it without ever showing themselves. My name's Tyler Grayson. I grew up in a small town in eastern Kentucky, mostly hills and woods with not much else going on. Hunting was just something everyone did. My dad took me and my younger brother out when we were kids, and it stuck with both of us. These days, we don't always get time to go together, but when we do, it's usually early mornings during deer season. This happened a couple years ago. Me and my brother Caleb went out to a piece of public land we'd hunted before. It's pretty remote if you go in far enough, which is why we liked it. We got there way before sunrise. Still completely dark when we parked. The air was cold, kind of damp, and there wasn't any wind. One of those mornings where everything feels still. We grabbed our gear and started walking in with our flashlights on low. The trail we took wasn't anything official, just something we knew from being out there before. It winds through the trees and eventually opens up near a ridge where we usually sit. We were maybe 20 minutes in, just walking and talking quietly, when we both heard it. Footsteps. Running, coming from somewhere ahead of us, not off to the side, not far away, straight toward us. We both stopped at the same time. Didn't say anything at first, just stood there listening. The footsteps kept coming, fast, heavy, like someone moving through the leaves without trying to be quiet at all. My first thought was, someone got hurt or lost, or something went wrong. That's what it sounded like, someone running straight at us in a hurry. I raised my voice a little and called out, "Hey!" The footsteps didn't stop. They kept coming, closer, louder. At that point, I lifted my flashlight a bit higher, trying to catch whatever it was. Caleb did the same. We were both standing there, lights pointed ahead, waiting to see someone come into view. But nothing did. The footsteps got right up to where our light reached. And then they stopped. Just like that. No slowing down, no shift, just stopped, right outside the edge of the light. We both stayed still, lights pointed forward, trying to see something. Anything. But there was nothing there, no person, no movement, just trees and darkness beyond the beam. I remember feeling that shift right then, from confusion to something else, because if someone had been running like that, they should have stepped into the light, or at least made some kind of noise when they stopped. But there was nothing, no breathing, no movement, no voice, just silence. I called out again, "You all right?" No response. Caleb said something too, asking if someone needed help. Nothing. We stood there for a while, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. It felt longer, just holding our lights steady, staring into the dark, trying to figure out what we were looking at or not looking at. I remember lowering my lights slightly and then raising it again, like maybe I just wasn't seeing something clearly, but there was still nothing. Then after a bit I heard it again, a single step, soft, further back this time. Then another, slow, careful, not running anymore, walking, away from us. I looked at Caleb and he was already looking at me. We both heard it. The footsteps kept going, slow, measured, crunch, pause, crunch. Moving back the way they came, still just outside the reach of the light, never stepping into it. We didn't follow, we didn't move at all. We just stood there and listened. The sound kept going for a while, then got fainter, then stopped completely. And that was it. Silence again. I remember taking a breath and realizing I'd been holding it. Caleb asked quietly, "What was that?" I didn't have an answer. None of it made sense. If it was a person, why run straight at us like that? Why stop right before stepping into the light? Why not say anything? And then why walk away like that? We stood there for another minute, just listening, waiting. But nothing else happened. The woods went back to normal, quiet, still. But it didn't feel the same anymore. I told Caleb we should head back. He didn't argue. We turned around and started walking back toward the truck. Neither of us said much on the way out. Every sound felt louder. Every step we took felt like it echoed more than it should. I kept glancing over my shoulder even though I couldn't see anything beyond the light. We didn't hear those footsteps again. No running, no walking, nothing. We made it back to the truck without seeing anyone else. No other cars in the lot, no sign anyone had been there. We sat in the truck for a minute before leaving. Neither of us really knew what to say. Maybe it was someone else out there. Maybe they got spooked when they saw our lights, but the way they stopped right at the edge of the light and never said a word, that's what stuck with me. Because if it was just another hunter, there's no reason to act like that. And I can't think of a normal explanation for why someone would run straight at you in the dark, just to stop where you can't see them, and then quietly walk away.